The topic tonight will be sort of a brief history of Iraq, but then my emphasis will be on US foreign policy towards Iraq. But to do that, I want to give background. First of all, the state of Iraq is an extremely young state. It has only existed effectively since 1919. It has only truly been independent since 1958. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, we're talking about a state that's less than 100 years old on a piece of land that has had civilization for over 6,000 years. So it's a little bit of a sort of strange disconnect to kind of have to remember that Iraq itself, even the term Iraq, is just essentially a 95-year-old term, that the Iraq itself is this artificial superimposed state on a piece of property that has really deep roots and really deep history. In fact, it's where writing first came about. It's where government either first came about or second came about. It's where agriculture was invented. It's a place with extremely deep history. It's the birthplace, along with Egypt, of Western civilization. So the civilization that you are so happy to praise and talk about how brilliant it is actually had its roots firmly in the Euphrates, Tigris, and Nile. But I want to actually start before the British artificially create Iraq and pull you back into the 19th century. British interests in the Arabian Gulf, incorrectly known as the Persian Gulf. It was renamed by the United States arbitrarily and unilaterally in the 1950s. Eisenhower did it as a gift to Iran. The Arabian Gulf, I don't recognize it. The Arabian Gulf got Britain's interest because of piracy. The British Empire had centered itself around India, and there were Arab pirates in the Arabian Gulf who would go into the Arabian Sea, and they would attempt to do something very similar to what the Somali pirates are doing today, either outright piracy or they would sort of bribe British ships, British cargo ships, into paying a fee to not be pirated. The British began, really the first attempt to do anything in the Arabian Gulf was in 1797. By the 1820s, the British were making treaties with the Gulf states. They were little emirates. They were basically pirate warlords who had sort of taken over, and they were running themselves as little principalities, little fiefdoms. By the 1840s, these treaties became a little bit more solid, and by 1853, I believe, the Trucial Coast, what is now the United Arab Emirates, was formed by alliance with the British. It's called Trucial because it was a truce, and then that got the English sort of on the ground and in the Arabian Gulf. They made a deal with Bahrain. Bahrain at the time had Qatar. Qatar decided to rebel. In fact, they declared their independence in 1871. The British used Bahrain's attempt to put down the Qatar uprising as an excuse to invade Bahrain. They make a deal with the Ottoman Empire. The deal with the Ottoman Empire gets the Kuwaiti Emirate and Qatar to the Ottoman Empire, and then in return the British sort of are allowed to have sphere of influence over Bahrain, the United Arab, what is now the United Arab Emirates, the Trucial Coast, and then Oman. Oman doesn't really ever become part of the British Empire, but is definitely within its sphere of influence. The reason all of this matters, of course, is because the British are going to change their mind. They're going to change their mind on Qatar, and they're going to change their mind on Kuwait, about giving those over to the Ottoman Empire. And the reason they changed their mind is because of a situation the British Empire finds itself in. Now, you got to remember, the British Empire is, as far as I know, the world's first ever drug dealing empire. It founded itself on the cruel slaughter of the Native Americans, the confiscation of their land, the cultivation of tobacco, a narcotic, using slave labor. And so the British Empire founded itself by slaughtering people, stealing their land, wrecking the soil, producing a drug that's addictive, that kills you, and doing all of this so that they could make a little bit of money. They, of course, will then expand, and in fact, that's one of the reasons they go to India. There are a lot of reasons to go to India, but one of the reasons is it gets you really close to Afghanistan, a country that has now defeated Britain 4 times. They wanted to be close to Afghanistan because that's the best source of poppy in the world, which of course gets them then their opium deals. They will even wage a war against China called the Opium War to force the Chinese to accept the British flow of opium. The British Empire isn't just a drug-dealing empire. It enforces drugs on the populations that resist against drugs. And they realized something. And they realized something really kind of interesting, that in a way, they can also get into energy. That energy isn't maybe as addictive, but it is certainly habit forming. And the reason they figure this out is because they start the coal industry. They start the coal industry in Merthyr, Merthyr, Wales, about 200 years ago. And they will get into petroleum. The way they will get into petroleum is with the Shell Oil Company. The Shell Oil Company. They get into trouble, though, by the end of the 19th century because the Dutch buy the majority stake in Shell. Effectively, the British Empire loses its oil company. There were 3 oil companies in the world at that point: Standard Oil, Shell, and then Royal Dutch. And Royal Dutch buys Shell out from the English. So now they're down to 2. There's an American oil company, and there's a Dutch oil company. This drives the English nuts, because even though the Netherlands and the United States are allies, right, you can only ever trust your friends so much. And the British Empire doesn't want to have to be dependent on its allies for oil. So the British do something that we would never consider doing. They turn to history to figure out what they can do to get around it, right? We just don't read, so forget history. And what they realize is that there is a place that had been using and exploiting oil way before we found oil in 1861. The US claims that it found oil, and it found it in 1861 in Oil Creek, Pennsylvania, right as the Civil War was breaking out. The reality is oil had actually been being produced and being pumped out of the ground in some way, shape, or form for almost 1,000 years prior to that. So it's sort of like, Henry Ford invented the car and the assembly line. The assembly line existed 1,000 years before Henry Ford, and the car was invented by a guy named Daimler in Germany. But anyway, so here's what happened. The British are reading history, and they realized that Arab cities were lit up at night using oil lamps. And they were lit up at night using the oil lamps about 1,000 years ago. If you could take a satellite, one of our satellites, backwards in time and set it so it went around the Earth at night, you would find that the Earth was pitch black except Arab cities. They sparkled because they had night lighting. The other thing that they noticed was, reading history, that the Roman Empire, the late Roman Empire, incorrectly called by most people the Byzantine Empire. There's no such thing as a Byzantine Empire. They never called themselves that. That is a name we have stuck and imposed upon them. The late Roman Empire used oil, and what they did with it was they created a thing called Greek flame. They would actually put it under pressure, and they would shoot it through a tube, mount it on a boat, and as it was coming out, they would detonate it, and you could catch ships on fire. In other words, the Greeks invented the flamethrower. And the reason the Greeks invented the flamethrower was because their capital, the Greeks who were ruling the late Roman Empire, their capital, Constantinople, was under siege by the Arabs, and they were in a desperate situation. They knew it was weeks left before they would be defeated. They needed a way out. The Roman emperor made a contest and said he would give a prize to anybody who could invent a way out of this situation. And they came up with Greek flame, the flamethrower. And the Arab navy, as it approached, gets set on fire because they didn't know this was going to happen. They didn't know about flamethrowers. And then another way that oil had been being used at the same time by the Romans and the Arabs and later on the Turks was napsain, which are basically grenade throwers. In combat, you would have a glass ball filled with oil. You would light it, and then you would throw it. And it would break because it's glass and put burning oil all over you. This is 1,000-year-old technology. So what does this mean for the British? It means that there was oil in what we now call the Middle East. The British at the time called it the Near East. There's oil somewhere in the Near East. They just got to go find it. And so they actually work out a deal in 1899 with the leadership in Kuwait to try and bring Kuwait, even though it's part of the Ottoman Empire, back into British sphere of influence. And then they upped the deal in 1901, effectively creating an autonomous region in the Ottoman Empire in Kuwait. Now, Kuwait had been, up until that moment, a part of the Ottoman Empire's Basra province. In the meantime, the British are working on the Persians and the Ottoman Empire. They're trying to woo the Ottomans, even though they're gobbling up Ottoman land, but at the same time, they're also trying to work on the Persians, and the Persians are rivals with the Ottomans, so the whole situation's a little tricky. But it's okay, the British are smart, so they can figure it out. And they go to the Qajars, who are the rulers of Persia, of modern-day Iran, and they make a deal. The Qajars were probably the worst rulers in human history. They were high on opium pretty much all the time, and the British, of course, were supplying them with the opium, so it was a good deal. And the British said, you know, we'll keep the opium flowing, don't you worry, it's coming. You can just stay in your little opium dens, and we got it going. But we would like a concession from you. We suspect that there's petroleum somewhere in the area. You probably are sitting on top of it. And you don't have any use for it because your country's backwards and you're high, so what's the point? Why don't you let us have a 95% concession? It's your petroleum, we're gonna pump it out of the ground, we'll take 95% of the profits and give you 5%, and we'll keep the opium flowing. And the Qajars went, deal, and they signed. And so in 1906, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company is created. Now, the Brits haven't found oil. They're speculating at this point. And the reason they're speculating is because there's this thing called history that informs them that there's probably something there. And the way you found oil 108 years ago was you walked. And you hoped something happened, like a squishiness under your feet. Or you found black shale, another great way to figure out if there's oil, because shale is like a sponge. And it'll absorb, or black sandstone for that matter, it'll absorb, whatever, sandstone's like a sponge too, it'll absorb the oil and turns it black. And so you basically just walked looking for the oil. And of course, oil was so common back then that you could just, with a shovel, dig an oil well. It's impossible to comprehend today because we've wiped out so much of it that all that's left now is stuff that we have to, in really catastrophic, toxic ways, pump out of the ground. But back then, it was relatively easy to find and relatively easy to access. Using the technology they had at the time, for every calorie they spent, whether it was human or mechanical, they got 100 calories in return. So it was a pretty good deal. If I walked up to you and I said, for every dollar you give me in investment money, I'll give you $100 back, you probably need to get on that deal. The British start walking around Khuzestan, which is the southwest corner of Iran. Its ancient name was Elam. Elam is the third ancient civilization. It was the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Elamites. They were the first three. And they find oil. And so the concession, the 95% concession, totally works out for the British, and they are going to be really rich. And they're thrilled, they're very excited. And carving off Kuwait when they did really works out well for them for two reasons. Because they also suspect that there's oil in the Ottoman Empire. The problem for them is that the Ottomans are trying to make deals with the Germans, and that's Great Britain's biggest rival. It's not fully cemented by 1901 that Great Britain and Germany are going to be complete rivals. Great Britain is still looking suspiciously at France, but it's starting to become clear, and the reason is because the Germans are building ships. They're building really high-quality ships. And the British don't like this because they want to be the state with the naval superiority. So the British decide for every German ship, they're going to build 2 British ships. And the two countries are on the verge, they're starting this process that will take them to the verge of bankruptcy because they start a massive arms race building these massive battleships and coal-powered battleships. But the British are starting to think, petroleum might just be the future. And the guy who controls petroleum just might be king. We really need to get after this thing. And the Germans make a concession with the Ottoman Turks over the oil in the Ottoman Empire. And because of that, Kuwait becomes really useful, because Kuwait's really close to the mouth of the Shatt al-Arab. The Shatt al-Arab is where the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, merge together and become one river. And so what would happen is any Ottoman oil found in the Basra province, the Mosul province, or the Baghdad province, what is modern-day Iraq, any oil found in that area would then probably be sent by river through the Shatt al-Arab right past Kuwait. So the British now have a real interest in using Kuwait as a military base. They can protect Elam, which is across the Arabian Gulf, and they could potentially shut off German oil supply should the Ottomans and the Germans work out a deal where the oil is flowing through the Shatt al-Arab. And then World War I breaks out. World War I is the culmination of this naval competition between Germany and Great Britain. I know the story you were told is Archduke Ferdinand is shot to death, and that causes all the major powers to go to war with each other and kill 13 million people. People are assassinated on a regular basis, and it doesn't cause 13 million people to be killed in 4 years of hideous, grotesque trench warfare. That maybe you could claim that's the camel that breaks the straw's back, because that'd be more accurate than the straw that broke the camel's back. The reality is that there was an arms race between Great Britain and Germany, and the two states had decided, the Germans had decided they were ready, and the British had decided the Germans were going to be ready soon. It's time to go ahead and do this war before the Germans are ready. So, and of course, it turns out the Germans were wrong. The Brits were right? There is no good guy. There is no bad guy in World War I. I know you want in your hearts the Germans to always be the bad guys. Let me rephrase it. There is no good guy in World War I. They're all bad guys. The British decide they need to knock the Ottoman Empire out. They decide that the old man, as they were referring to it, just needs to go. And on top of that, they make a deal with the French. It's a secret deal. It's called Sykes-Picot. And in this secret deal, the British carve up, the British and the French sit down and they take a map of the Middle East, and they start drawing lines. One of the things they decide right away, this is primary for the British, is they're going to cut Iran, what is now Iran, Persia at the time. They're going to cut it right in half. And they're going to take the southern half. It just so happens the oil is in the southern half. And then the Russian Empire is going to take the northern half. The Russians aren't there. They don't know that this deal is being made. They'll be told later. And then the Russians, to make Iran more palatable, the Russians will also be given Constantinople. They'll be given Thrace. And the Greeks will get the western part of Turkey, and the Italians will get the southwestern corner of Turkey. The Greeks and Italians aren't there either. They'll just we'll include them later. France and Great Britain get to make the decisions. France will then get Syria, the Mosul province, the Baghdad province, and the Basra province. And then, of course, the British want to complete the Crusades. So they'll get Palestine. In other words, World War I, in the mind of the British, is the conclusion of the failed Crusades. So when Arabs bring up the Crusades and say, this is one of the reasons we can't trust you, is because of the Crusades, it's because it's actually just happened again. It's not like it's something that happened in the past and the Arabs are just stuck in the past and they can't forgive. It just happened. The British then are going to take Palestine and what is now the state of Jordan. The British attack at a place called Gallipoli. It's at the Dardanelles, which is Turkey's split in two. There's European Turkey and Asian Turkey, and they're separated by the Bosporus and Dardanelles. They attack at a place called Gallipoli in 1915. The idea is knock the Turkish army out, go inland, and then capture Constantinople. And once you capture the flag, the Ottomans will surrender, and that's it. That's the end of that, and then you just carve this thing up like a Thanksgiving Day turkey. And the Brits are bloodied. Well, the Australians, because of course they're not going to send their guys. They did, but really, they sent a lot of Australians too. Australians are bitter about it to this day. And Gallipoli is a disaster. It's a rout. The British forces are massacred, and the British are forced to withdraw. So now the Brits decide, okay, that didn't work. Let's try a different approach. And the different approach that they try is there's an Arab uprising already going on in what is now Saudi Arabia. And they go in the Hejaz Mountains. And they go to those Hejaz Arabs, and there's a kingdom of Hejaz. They go to the king, his name is Faisal, and they make a deal. They say, look, we'll help you guys if you fight the Ottomans because, an enemy of an enemy is a friend, so you must be our ally, and we'll take care of business together. And they do, and that's the famous and probably overblown Lawrence of Arabia, right? He probably did a hell of a lot less than he claims. And the Arabs actually beat the British Empire to Damascus. It's infuriating to the Brits because they want to get to Damascus first, and they want to get to Jerusalem first, and the Arabs are actually beating them to these two places first. And the reason that's a problem for the Brits is because the Arabs, naively, think that once they capture this Arab territory, since they're Arabs and they're capturing Arab territory and they're rebelling against the Ottoman Turks who are not Arabs, that they will be allowed to then keep that Arab territory since they're Arabs. And the British have no intention of the Arabs actually keeping their Arab territory. They want it for themselves or for the French as a concession to the French. And so getting to Damascus first is a problem for the British, but they figure out a way around it, and they actually sabotage the attempt that the Arabs make to unify the Arabian Peninsula with Syria and Iraq and Palestine. And they ultimately break it up. And they go to the League of Arab States, and they create the mandates that you maybe have heard of, the Palestine Mandate. And the French are actually given the authority to invade Lebanon and Syria, and they do. But the Brits ended up with a problem in this whole mix. And the problem was that the Russians go communist. And when the Russians go communist, the Russians decide they're against all forms of imperialism. Not entirely true, but whatever. They decide they are against all forms of imperialism, and as a result, they will not participate in the annexation of northern Iran, which means the British can't go in. Iran was too powerful for the British to handle on their own. They need the Russians to go into the north, right? Divide and conquer. So they can't do this on their own. So when that happens, the Brits go, okay, fine, we're not going to get Iran. We still need our oil. Well, they had found oil in what is now northern Iraq, the Kurdish part of Iraq. At the time, it was the Mosul province of the Ottoman Empire. And so they're like, okay, we'll just take what we were going to give the British, which was Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra. We'll take those for ourselves. The French were going to get it. The French can go to hell. They can just get Syria and Lebanon because we're losing Iran. And so that's what they do. The French army goes into Syria. The British army goes into what is now modern-day Iraq. Some British soldier is flipping through a book looking for a thing to call this place, and he comes up with Iraq. It's a mystery to us. We don't even know how the name came about. It could have been from Uruk, which was an ancient Iraqi city. It could have been from an ancient Arabic word that wasn't in use anymore that meant riverbank. There's all sorts of speculation. We don't know. There's just some British guy flipping through books looking for a word. He applies it, and boom, Iraq is born as a British protectorate. The French defeat the Arab army in Syria. The king, King Faisal, the guy that the British had been working with, the guy that Lawrence of Arabia had been working with, the ally, just 10 minutes ago, gets his ass handed to him, and then the British turn to him and go, gosh, we're so sorry the French beat you up like that. That's awful. Hey, do you want Iraq? We need a king for Iraq. And he went, sure. And so he goes to Baghdad. The Iraqis, by the way, aren't on board. They rebel. And it's kind of a rough situation, in fact. It's quite violent. And so the British decide to honor Baghdad. Baghdad isn't an old city. It's only like 1,200 years old. It's, for Middle East cities, it's a joke. It's like, brand new. 1,200 years, what is that? But they honor the city of Baghdad by being the first city ever mass bombed from the air by aircraft. Now, it's not the first time that bombs have been thrown from an airplane or dropped from an airplane. That was actually in the Mexican Revolution, the recent one, not the 1810 one, but the 1912 one. Mexicans actually pioneered bombing. Isn't that cool? They took biplanes, and a guy would have a hand grenade, and he'd arm it, and he'd just throw it out the cockpit. And that was the original bombing. You're probably, some of you anyway, are familiar with Guernica, which it turns into a Picasso painting, and it's from the Spanish Civil War, 1937? I'm probably wrong, and somebody's going to post nasty things. It was 38. Anyway, somewhere around there. And what happened was the German Luftwaffe, they were called the Condors, went to Spain, and they bombed the city of Guernica. They bombed the city of Guernica about 18 years, is that right? Yeah, about 18 years after Baghdad was bombed. Now, the difference, of course, is, and this is why we remember Guernica and think it's the first city that was bombed by airplanes. I'm saying by airplanes because the Germans did bomb London with dirigibles, for those of you who are going to nitpick this. In World War I, they would send balloons over, and then they would have a guy arm a grenade and throw it out. So London did get bombed by dirigibles, but not airplanes, because the German airplanes didn't have the range. They couldn't cross the English Channel and do it. I think, and maybe I'm being cruel here, I suspect that the reason we remember Guernica and not Baghdad as the first place is because Guernica were white people and Baghdad wasn't. And in fact, my evidence for this is what David Lloyd George said, Prime Minister of Great Britain. There was an outcry in Britain that we were bombing Baghdad, this not ancient city, but medieval city nonetheless. And the outcry was, we can't do this. We can't go around bombing cities. This is not appropriate behavior. This is clearly inhumane. There's serious, right? Can you imagine the British population actually being against bombing a place? And David Lloyd George got up and addressed Parliament, and he said, and please forgive me, but I'm quoting, and so I can say anything I want to when I'm quoting, right? He said, "Great Britain reserves the right to bomb niggers." There you have it. That's all you need to know. The Iraqis will be assimilated into the British Empire until 1958. But before we get to 58, I need to back that up a little bit and go to 1944. In fact, we'll make it December. So we're in World War II. And World War II has turned into quite the nightmare, right? It's actually a pretty bad disaster. The Germans and the Japanese give us a run for their money. And in fact, World War II is essentially started because of oil. Japan has attacked the United States December 7th because of oil. And here's why. Japan realizes it has problems when it goes into China. First of all, it doesn't have enough equipment. That's one of the problems. But it doesn't have the people. The Chinese seriously outnumber the people. And so the Japanese people. So when the Japanese go in, they have to use technological superiority to win this. The Japanese attack China in 1937. I know most of you think World War II started in 1939. It started in 1937. And July 7th, when the Japanese attack. And when they do, they very thoroughly are beating the crap out of the Chinese. It's a disaster. It's a rout. When Germany attacks the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, the thinking is, on the German mind, is that they will be able to overcome this massive state, the Soviet Union, with its huge population and its huge resources, and even its very significant industry. They will be able to overcome this state because Japan is going to attack from the other side. That was the original plan, that Japan was supposed to attack the Soviet Union from the east. And so Germany attacks, and Germany is routing the Soviet army, but there's no Japan. There's no Japanese attack from the other side. And so Germany decides, maybe if we give them a gift, maybe if we give them something, they'll jump on board and they'll invade. And so the Germans go to the French, whom they've already defeated. Took them 6 weeks to put the French down, right? It was lightning fast, unbelievable victory. They go to the French and they say, look, we want you to gift Vietnam to the Japanese, but you don't have to fully withdraw. You'll co-rule it. It'll be a co-dominion. So Japan, it'll be a colony. Vietnam will be a colony with Japan and you. And we're hoping that that gets the Japanese to attack Russia once we give this gift. So they do this. The Japanese sign. The Japanese immediately invade and attack the French. I don't know why. That's what they do. Because they signed that you could come in, and they go in and attack. It's a strange disconnect. But anyway, they go in, and the first thing that the United States does is it says, you're getting too close to the Philippines, that belongs to us, you're making us nervous, we're cutting off your oil. And so end of July, beginning of August of 1941, the United States cuts off Japan's oil. Now, most of you probably can't even imagine this, but the United States was in Saudi Arabia at the time. The United States actually provided Japan with 80% of all of its oil. 90% of all of Japan's aviation fuel. And here's what's even less imaginable, is that oil was coming out of 3 states, right? Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. Isn't that weird? That was the original Saudi Arabia. The reason it's not anymore is we pumped it all out of the ground. In case you were wondering if this is a finite resource or not, it is. We know firsthand we're no longer the Saudi Arabia of the world. You go, well, fracking, yeah, that's limited. Enjoy it while you got it. Don't drink the water. So, the United States cuts off Japan's oil. Japan had 9 months of oil in reserve. They had, at that moment, a choice to make. And this is the choice we were trying to force them to do. By the way, the year earlier, we moved the US Pacific Fleet from just north of San Diego to Pearl Harbor in 1940. We just like, here it is, a little closer to you, so it's easier to access. Then we cut off their oil the next year. They've got 9 months. Within that 9 months, Japan has to decide to do something. It either has to surrender in China and withdraw, because that's our demand, and then we'll start the flow of oil again. Or Japan has to find an alternative oil source, and they do. It's called the Dutch East Indies, today Indonesia. Dutch East Indies had a lot of oil. In fact, there were US oil companies already there. Standard Oil is there, for example. And so, and by the way, Royal Dutch Shell is there. So what the Japanese decide to do is they have to attack Indonesia. They can't go any other way for oil. But if they're going to attack Indonesia, they have a problem because the Philippines is in between Japan and Indonesia. And there is no way to get to Indonesia without going next to the Philippines, because you can go to the west of it and you can go to the east of it, but you can't go any other way. You're going to have to go near the Philippines. The Philippines effectively could act like a US aircraft carrier, a stationary aircraft carrier, and they could just bomb Japanese shipping lanes and prevent the Japanese from getting the oil from Indonesia back to the mainland. And so the Japanese decide if they're going to attack Indonesia, which was ruled by the Dutch at the time, if they're going to do this, they have to knock out the Philippines. And they decide if they're going to do that, they might as well try and take out the 4 aircraft carriers in the US Pacific Fleet and just sort of, in a strange strategy, make the US defeat of Japan so painful that the US will negotiate a deal with Japan. That was their strategy. They never planned to beat us. They didn't have the resources. They're fighting China, and they're going to attack us. They can't even defeat China. How are they going to attack us? It's impossible. Their goal was to just make defeating them difficult enough that we would negotiate out a deal with them, and then hopefully that deal would include letting them have the Dutch East Indies. Of course, it doesn't work. It's an epic disaster failure, and they realize at the instant they attack Pearl Harbor, and the 4 aircraft carriers happened to all be on training missions that day and not there. So they missed the aircraft carriers. They lost. The Japanese lost December 7, 1941. They fight another 4 years because they're stubborn, but they lost that instant. And they knew it. Germany is tearing its hair out now because their whole goal in gifting Vietnam was to get the Japanese to attack, and instead of that happening, now the United States is in the war, and it's just gotten way more complicated. Germany had one oil source, Ploiești. It's in Romania, not far from Bucharesti, which is the capital of Romania. It was one big oil field, and that was it. All their oil came from there. And so the US immediately began bombing that oil field. In fact, some of our first bombing raids were there. One of our most tragic bombing raids was there. One of our bombing raids, we lost 75% of our bombers. I think that officially counts as suicide at that point. So let me go back to December of 44. By December of 44, the Germans the whole reason the Germans do Stalingrad is to get to the oil in Russia, right? And that they get to it, they capture it. But the Russians blew up all all the refineries and all the rigs, so when the Germans get there, they can extract just enough oil to pay for going there and then getting back. Yeah, it didn't work. It was an epic disaster. And then Stalingrad turns into a catastrophe for them. The Germans are out of oil. Ploesti keeps getting bombed. I actually was talking to Adam the other day, and we looked at the number of US raids. Was it 1,000 or some ridiculous number like that on German oil production facilities in World War II? There was like 1,000 military, mostly bombers, but there was other stuff too, in World War II just to knock out Germany's ability to have oil. In fact, they were so thorough at it that Germany had switched its transport trucks over to gas produced by burning wood. They actually had little wood stoves in German trucks, and they would toss wood in, and that would produce home gas, and they would run the home gas through they actually had to convert German trucks to wood-burning vehicles because they had so thoroughly run out of gasoline. Germany is in a desperate situation in December of 1944. It decides to take all its equipment from the Eastern Front, because when we attack at Normandy, some of you probably think that World War II started June 6, 1944. When we attacked Normandy, the Germans left their worst equipment and their worst soldiers on our front and kept their best stuff for the Russian front because that's where the hard fighting was. The Russian front was their priority. They had to somehow win this. It was probably unwinnable, but that was their priority. They could hold us back because we were inferior to the Russians. They could hold us back with one hand while they put the rest of their body into fighting the Russians. And they decide, well, geez, it would be great if we didn't have to fight a two-front war. It's a little late to figure that out. And so they take all their best equipment, their Tiger IIs and their Panthers, and they put them on trains and they send them back to the Western Front. And their goal is to do a knockout blow against the United States. And what follows is really against Britain, but they're hoping that once Britain's out, that the United States will negotiate out a peace deal. Their goal is to cut a hole through Belgium to the English Channel, trap the British Army in the Netherlands with all the Allied forces that were under the British commander Montgomery, and then wipe them out. And then hopefully that would take away the Western Allies' taste for the war, and it would make us negotiate out a deal, and then they could take everything they had and put it back on the Eastern Front, and maybe they could fight the Russians. It was, of course, totally insane. The whole thing was insane. And what's amazing is for the first 2.5 weeks, they beat the crap out of us. It's an epic disaster for us. With the exception of Bastogne, the whole Western Front, they make this massive bulge. They are on their way, that's why it's called the Battle Bulge, they're on their way to the English Channel. They've got this thing. American forces, British forces just melt as the Germans are punching a hole in us. And then they ran out of gas. The irony is that by bringing the Tiger IIs, which were complete gas guzzlers, they ran out of gas that much faster. They didn't need Tiger IIs to take out Shermans. You could take out Shermans with a rock if it was thrown properly. They just needed Panthers to take out Shermans. But they wanted their tough, their best. And so they send their Tiger IIs and they send their Panthers, and they didn't properly ration their petroleum. They run out. I don't know if you know this, but tanks that can't move are pretty useless. And infantry can easily take them out at that point. They had cranks on the inside of the turrets so you could turn them. But these Tiger II tank turrets are the size of a house. And so there's guys going, oh God, trying to turn. Anyway, we decide after the Germans lose the Battle of the Bulge, we never ever want to be that guy. We are never, ever going to be the guy that runs out of oil in a war. That sucked. And so everything from that moment on in US foreign policy essentially revolves around oil. In fact, the next month, January of 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt flies to Egypt. He gets on a ship in the Suez Canal and meets with the King of Saudi Arabia, and they strike a deal. And the deal is as follows. The US will guarantee the Saudi royal family forever. No matter what happens. Saudi Arabia gets attacked by foreigners, we will invade and protect the Saudis. Saudi has a democratic revolution where the people want to get rid of their monarchy. We will invade and murder those citizens and restore the monarchy. We will protect Saudi Arabia forever the Saudi royal family forever. Screw Saudi Arabia. We will protect the Saudi royal family forever, regardless of what happens. So long as they keep the oil flowing and they allow Aramco, Arabian American Oil Company, to operate freely and give us the air base in Dhahran, which they do. They make the deal. So let me back up just a sec. In 1906, the Iranians, in a moment of insanity, decide that they don't like the Qajars, and they decide to become a democracy. And they have a revolution. And while the British decide they like the Qajars because of that 95% concession that they have with them, and so they do a counter-revolution. And the way they do it is they go to Iranian clergy and they stage an Islamic revolution and overthrow the democracy in Iran. So run forward again, it's post-World War II, it's 1950. Iran decides to have another democratic movement. They elect a prime minister named Mossadegh. His first order of business is to nationalize the Iranian oil. But before he does, he kicks the British embassy out. Because in 1906, that's how the British staged the counter-revolution, was they used their operatives in the British embassy to overthrow the Iranian government. So the first thing he does is he kicks the British government out. Then he nationalizes what is now called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. He nationalizes it, and he calls it the National Iranian Oil Company, the NIOC. And Britain now can't overthrow the government. The British go running to Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, and they go, can you help us overthrow the Iranian democracy? They just took our oil. We don't know how our oil got under their sand, but they just took it from us. And so Truman goes, the United States doesn't do that sort of thing, and doesn't help the Brits. But don't worry, there's going to be an Eisenhower. And in 1953, using an operative named Kermit Roosevelt, who's the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, by the way, and an employee of the CIA, they do stage an overthrow of the Iranian government, and they replace the Mossadegh and the democratically elected government with the Shah of Iran. 5 years later, Iraq is in the midst of a revolution. The revolution is a communist and socialist revolution. The bulk of the people are socialists, but there's a large communist faction involved. The Soviet Union is funneling money into Iraq to help this socialist and communist revolution prevail. And so is the United States. There's the fun little story of the United States is, after World War II, we decide that the British and the French empires need to go, because we need that. We want all that stuff. And in fact, when we overthrow the government in Iran, we don't exactly hand Iran back over to the British. We go, oh, and thank you, Britain, that's ours now. And in fact, Iran's nickname will become Little America. So the British are watching their empire crumble, and we're helping that happen with the Soviets. We're working with the Soviets to undermine the British Empire. Our thinking is, let's take out the British government, British puppet government in Iraq. It's okay if it's a socialist revolution or a communist revolution, as long as it's out of the British Empire, because then we can turn around and we can fight the Soviets and try and get Iraq from the Soviets. First thing first, we got to get it from the Brits. In 1958, the Arab world is going through a Pan-Arabist movement. Egypt and Syria unify. And Iraq is supposed to have the revolution, that's what the socialists are planning, and then immediately unify with Egypt and Syria. The communists don't want this to happen because the communists are getting a lot of money from the Soviets, and they know if they unify with Egypt and Syria, Iraq won't then end up in the Soviet sphere of influence. It'll end up being kind of this separate thing. And so when Iraq gets its independence from the British, they kill Faisal III, the king of Iraq. When they get their independence from the British and throw the Brits out, they don't immediately join the United Arab Republic. That was what the union with Egypt and Syria was called. But they adopt the flag, which is why all three states have a very similar flag, right? It's red, white, black. Egypt and Syria had 2 green stars. Iraq had 3 green stars because they were going to be the third state to join. But they didn't join. And then the leader of Iraq, that ends up being a communist, works really hard to keep the socialists at bay because he doesn't want to join. And eventually Nasser, the leader of Egypt, screws the whole thing up. Syria breaks away and goes its own way. and this United Arab Republic attempt fails. Iraq will actually get into a very bad situation because it'll start to have one government after the other, and they're usually military governments, and they're coup d'etats, and people are being assassinated, and Iraq becomes this unbelievably unstable place. It's just bad. What will eventually happen, though, is a political party will rise up in Syria and Iraq simultaneously called the Ba'ath Party. Now, Syria is having the same problem. Lots of instability, military coups, leaders being assassinated. Around the same time, both Iraq and Syria will stabilize because the Ba'ath Party will gain power in both places. And once it does, that ends. There's no more of this constantly violent overthrow of governments. Iraq then starts to move out of the Soviet sphere of influence and starts to talk to the United States. The Baathists are actually socialists as opposed to communists. The socialists in the Middle East wanted to be neutral. They did not want to be pro-Soviet. They didn't want to be pro-US. They wanted to go their own way. And so they tended to not really care who they were talking to and who they were working with. They were willing to work with both sides. And Saddam Hussein has been working his way up the ranks in this party and becomes the #2 guy in Iraq during the 70s when Iraq starts to talk to us. And in fact, he eventually becomes the de facto ruler of Iraq, even though he's not the president, probably by around 1975, 1976. We decide to test him. We want to see what kind of a man he is. And so in 1978, we send him a list of, I think it was 600 Iraqis we didn't like. They were university professors, they were socialists, they were communists. They were just people we thought were dangerous because they had interests that were different than ours. And we said, we'd really like you to deal with these people. They're Iraqis in Iraq. We just didn't like them. And so he said, okay, cool. He took that list and he arrested them, did a mass mock trial, all 600 at the same time, and then executed them by hanging, all, because they were, of course, found guilty, all 600 at the same time and broadcast it live on TV. And we went, man, we can work with this guy. He is exactly what we were looking for. We didn't tell him what to do with those people. Well, I think we assumed he would just arrest them and disappear them. And he executes them live on TV. The Shah of Iran starts to get into trouble. And one of the reasons is because the clergy in Iran turns on him. He wants to create a secular Iran. He wants to create an Iran that he thinks he can turn into sort of a new United States. A little, in fact, hair bleach was probably the #1 bought commodity in Iran, so that Iranians could all be blonde, and nose jobs. The nose job frequency in Iran is through the roof because everybody wants to look like an American. The clergy goes against this. The clergy says, we're a Muslim country, we're not a secular country, you can't do this to us. And they start to work against them, and of course at the center of this is a guy by the name of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was in exile in France. He leaves France, he goes to Iraq, where he ends up under the care of Saddam Hussein. We realize when the revolution breaks out in Iran, we realize we have a problem. And the problem is we're never going to be able to get Iran back. It's a done deal. The Islamic Revolution has taken all the nastiness that we did to them, and it's turned it into too much rage. This is not a bridgeable situation. One of the reasons is because of the 1953 overthrow of their democracy. They know we did it. We know we did it, and we stuck them with a quarter-century of tyranny under the Shah. And all that tyranny has turned into anti-American sentiment. It's too toxic. We're never going to get them back. Having said that, we don't want Iran to go Soviet. And the clergy is rising up in Iran, but so is the Communist Party. The communists have a really good chance of winning in Iran. The Tudeh Party, and there are actually other communists as well. They have a really good chance of pulling this thing off. And so we're looking at this going, Islamists, clergy, Islamists, communists. Which one do we want, right? We've lost Iran either way. We're never going to get it back. But if it goes communist, it'll probably fall into the Soviet sphere of influence. If it goes Islamist, the Islamists will hate the Soviets as much as they hate us. And so the Soviets won't get them either. And so we go to Saddam Hussein and we go, hey, how about you release the Ayatollah Khomeini back into Iran, and then let's see if he can't foment this Islamist revolution and get them to win, because if they can win, it neutralizes Iran. It doesn't let Iran fall into the Soviet sphere of influence. And so he does. And so the Ayatollah Khomeini is smuggled into Iran, and the clergy win. By the way, the communists worked very closely with the Islamists until they won the revolution, and then once the Islamists were in charge, they murdered all the communists. Be very careful who you make as a friend. Very careful. The reason the Iranian hostage crisis happens is because Iranian college students, your age, decide that they want to prove that the United States overthrew their democracy in 1953 and stuck them with a quarter century of tyranny. Well, the way you prove it is you got to get the documents. Well, everybody knows that embassies are where the CIA is headquartered, and so you got to capture the embassy. And so Iranian students go march on the embassy. The Iranian government doesn't want this to happen. The new Islamic Republic doesn't want this to happen because it's an international incident. Because embassies are the sovereign territory of the state that's being represented at the embassy. So the Iranian students climbing the wall and entering the compound, those guys are actually technically invading sovereign territory of the United States. It's an international incident. This is not okay. So the Islamic Republic calls the United States Embassy up, which is all the embassy personnel is gone. The only people left are CIA operatives. Call them up, and they go, hey, get the hell out of there. We're about to have an international incident. And two groups of embassy people do leave, but the bulk are still there when the students capture the embassy because they're shredding the documents, because they really just don't want those documents to fall in those students' hands. And the students capture the embassy, they see all the shredded documents, they go, okay, cool, they put them in garbage bags, they take them to nearby schools, dump them, and go, look at all these puzzles we brought you, kids. Do you want to put those together for us? And those kids do. And of course, it's a blow-by-blow report on everything we did in 1953 to overthrow their government. They make lots of photocopies of it and spread it around the world. And then the students make it complicated and go, we'll release these CIA operatives as soon as the United States apologizes. And of course, President Jimmy Carter can't apologize for that because we're going to deny it until, was it last year or year before we finally admitted we did it? I think it was last year. So Carter keeps denying it, right? And even though they've got the documents, they're no longer shredded. They're back together. And anyway, so we then inform Iraq of something that we think is a good idea, and that would be to attack Iran. And the reason we think Iraq should attack Iran is because that part of Iran that has the oil, Elam, now called Khuzestan, that part is populated by Arabs. This is how funny this story actually is. If there is a God, he decided to put all the oil in the Middle East underneath the feet of Arabs, with the exception of the Kurdish oil. Even the oil in Iran, Iranians aren't Arabs, they're Persians, well, the dominant population. But the part of Iran that has the oil is the Arab part. And so Iraq says Arabs should rule Arabs. So Iraq should take that part, which would make Iraq very rich. And because Iraq already was third largest proven oil reserves on earth, it would launch them to second place after Saudi Arabia if they had Iran's oil. And so this is in Iraq's, it's probably not in their best interest, but it's in Saddam Hussein's best interest. And so we tell them the Iranian military in the aftermath of the revolution is in disarray. Yeah, the country's 3 times bigger than yours in population and land. Yeah, it's got a bunch of American military equipment. You guys have Soviet and French military equipment. We'll give you some American equipment to help balance you out. Go, you can do this. You've got this thing. And of course, Iraq attacks Iran, and it's a disaster. The Iraqis barely penetrate into Iran. They get bogged down. Their goal was to capture a place called Abadan. It was the largest oil refinery on earth in Iran. They fail to capture it. They blow it to smithereens, but they fail to capture it. The Iranians build a new oil refinery on the island of Khark. It will become the largest oil refinery on earth, so the Iranians had two. And we bomb it. The United States of America, we bombed it in 1987 and obliterated it. That's not an act of war, I guess, but it seems like one. Anyway, Iran sat down and calculated how much oil was still in the ground and the cost to build a third oil refinery. And Iran decided they didn't have enough oil left in the ground to recoup the cost of building a new oil refinery by the time they ran out of oil. So they decided that from that point on, from 1987 on, they would just sell their oil to somebody else who had the refineries and then buy the refined products back from whomever they sold it to. And it's one of the reasons why the recent sanctions the United States has imposed on Iran have been so devastating, because Iran actually is having gasoline shortages, even though it has like the 4th largest proven oil reserves on Earth. Right? It's like such a twist. It's like the South not having uniforms in the Civil War. The South didn't have uniforms in the Civil War. So, because we didn't have industry, because the Yankees had it. Anyway, so fine. The Iran-Iraq war turns into this absolutely hideous disaster. The United States tries to put sanctions on both states, and then we begin selling weapons to both states. We tell the world we're not going to sell, nobody should sell weapons to them, and then we immediately do. And we sell the Iraqis pretty much everything there is imaginable, including gas warfare equipment. We sell them VX gas, mustard gas, we sent them anthrax, genius moment. And we sell them fighter jets. We sell them, you name it, we sold it to them. The Iranians we're not really selling weapons systems to, we're selling spare parts to, because the Iranian military is entirely US equipment and they desperately need the spare parts. But don't worry, we were selling it to them for about 4 times market value. So we were making our money off of it. And illegally, by the way, and then using that money to then fund illegal CIA operations in Central America. It's complicated, but we made the guy who did this, Oliver North, into a national hero, even though he completely abrogated the Constitution and should have been shot by firing squad for treason. But anyway, so that's a different story. The Iran-Iraq war ends. It's a disaster for both states, probably 1 million people dead. Neither state gained anything. The borders are the same borders that they started with. Neither state gained anything. The Iranians actually technically surrendered. They approached the Iraqis and said, look, this is just stupid. And the Iraqis had actually offered to surrender multiple times before this, but the Iranians kept saying, no, no, no. And then the Iraqis were like, oh, thank you. Please, let's stop. The Iraqis were never capable of defeating Iran, just for the numerical superiority, but they do inflict enormous losses on Iran. Of the 1 million people who die, about 750,000 were Iranian and about 250,000 were Iraqis. And one of the reasons was the Iraqi military was fully decked out. I actually did a battle tour of Khuzestan with an officer in the Iranian army, and he was an artillery officer, and he took me to, this is the maximum point of Iraqi tank penetration. He took me to the point where maximum infantry penetration. He took me to Abadan, and I got to kind of see what was going on. And he said, look, my soldiers, we didn't have enough rifles, we didn't have enough boots, we didn't have enough jackets, we didn't have enough helmets. So we actually assigned soldiers to keep track of who had similar boot sizes so that when somebody died, you just go get his boots. Whereas the Iraqi military, they had night vision goggles and they had gas masks and they were gassing us. And he even told me a story, I'll just repeat it. They were on an island in the Shatt al-Arab, and they were a mortar unit, and they were firing mortar shells into Iraq. And he lived very close. He was like a 3-hour drive, I think. And so he, as an officer, issued himself leave orders. Isn't that cool? I'd like to be able to do that. He issued himself leave orders, took a ferry to the shore, got in his car. He just parked his car right there where the ferry was, and drove home, and spent the evening with his wife and his daughter. They ate dinner, watched TV, and then he jumped in his car and during the night drove back. And he gets there in the morning, it's 3 a.m. or whatever. And the ferry operator goes, He goes, what do you mean? He goes, we were gassed while you were gone. Everybody's dead in your unit. You can't go. So the lesson there is if you ever get hungry, go home. So that's the lesson to learn from that. Iraq was using gas, so the war ends. Iran wasn't, but there was the famous Halabja gassing. 1,700 Iraqi Kurds were gassed in the night in a village called Halabja. When that happened, the US's response under the Reagan administration was to send Jean Kirkpatrick to Iraq to cover it up. And what she did was she blamed the Iranians for gassing the Kurds in Iraq. The reality is the Iraqis gassed the Kurds in Iraq on US intelligence, bad US intelligence. We had provided the Iraqis with satellite photographs showing an Iranian unit in Halabja. The Iraqis showed up at night, dropped the gas from helicopters, helicoptered off. In the morning, there's a bunch of dead civilians laying around. Why? Because the Iranians had pulled out in the night and the Kurds had moved back into their village. It was a mistaken attack. It wasn't just a mistaken attack, it was a mistaken attack against the population that Iraq actually had a relatively decent relationship with. The Kurds were a minority that had a semi-autonomous region in the north, but more importantly, the Kurds had land claims against Turkey, Syria, and Iran, and the Iraqis, Saddam Hussein, allowed Kurdish military units in Iraqi Kurdistan to operate against Turkey, Syria, and Iran. So they actually kind of had an arrangement. So there is no strategic reason on earth for Saddam Hussein to gas 1,700 Kurdish civilians who live in a poor village and goat herd. It was just random dumb luck. It was warfare. It was a mistake based on faulty intelligence. The incident, though, is going to come back and bite Saddam Hussein, right? Because that's going to be one of the reasons we're going to use to go after him. Even though we try to cover it up for him and say that the Iranians did it. The war ends. And when the war ends, Iraq and Iran are actually in kind of weird shape. There are parts of their economy that are really robust, but there are parts of their economy that are in really big trouble. And one of the problems that they have is they're in a lot of debt because of all the weapons they've had to buy to murder each other wholesale for the 8 years. And so the parts of the economy that are robust include the fact that in the case of both countries, women have had to take on really important roles for women engineers, women MDs, women teachers, women professors, women in government. And the reason is because the men are on the combat field murdering each other, just like happened in the United States in World War II, right? We brought women into the factories, and then as soon as the men came home, we said, okay, you can go back now, you can go back. We even had women baseball teams, right, World War II. This is what Iraq did. This is what Iran experienced because they had to. This is just survival. Iraq's parliament in 1990 was 27% women. The United States' Congress in 1990 was 2% women. So in some measures, Iraq kind of had taken this leap ahead, at least in terms of women's rights. Iraq was a secular state. Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. He was a nasty bastard, as I've already illustrated with the murder of those people. He does occasionally go after the Shia, and he does occasionally go after the Kurds. His biggest crime against humanity was he killed people who were politically opposed to him. So if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm the type of person who can't keep his mouth shut. If I was an Iraqi professor, I'd have been dead a long time ago under Saddam Hussein. He just disappeared me, fed me to dogs or whatever. And so he's a nasty bastard that we're working with. In fact, Donald Rumsfeld flies to Baghdad in the 1980s and puts his arm around Saddam Hussein and says, Saddam Hussein is a very good friend of the United States. Right? The war ends, and the two states, 1989, the two states need to get back on their feet, Iran and Iraq. They're both OPEC members, so the first thing they decide to do is go to OPEC and ask for help. The reason they want help is they want a larger share of the oil markets. Larger share of the oil markets so that they can get money fast enough so they can start paying their debts down and recover their economy. OPEC agrees. OPEC decides it's going to, across the board, every state in OPEC, from Indonesia to Saudi Arabia, they're going to cut oil production to Venezuela. They're going to cut oil production, not dramatically, but significantly. And then Iran and Iraq will be allowed to increase oil production so that the amount of oil in the markets will be the same, so the price won't fluctuate. It'll be the same price. It's just Iraq and Iran will have a larger share of the markets. So that everybody walks away from the meeting, everybody's feeling good. All the OPEC states feel good that they're helping out Iraq and Iran. And Iraq starts increasing production, Iran starts increasing production, and the price of oil plummets. Why? Because there's a glut of oil in the markets. What does that mean? Well, it means somebody's cheating and overproducing. Then the Iraqis start to notice something really suspicious in 1990. They notice that the amount of oil in their oil wells is dropping on the oil fields that they share with Kuwait, and it's dropping faster than they're supposed to. Kuwait and Iraq had a treaty that all the oil fields that were on both sides of the border, that those oil fields would go down, that they would pump them at a certain rate, right? Because, you know, if I pump one side of the field down, it doesn't go down faster than the other side of the field just because there's an international border there, because it's a fluid. So the way to make sure you split the oil field fairly is you have to have both sides pump it out at a certain rate. And they noticed that those oil fields are dropping faster than they should be, and that there's a glut of oil in the markets. The Iraqis also discover, to their shock and dismay, that oil fields that they don't have on both sides of the oil field, of the border, but are near the border, are also dropping at a faster than predicted rate for the rate at which the Iraqis are pumping. So they call in the UN, and they have UN inspectors go inspect their oil fields to see what's going on. And they discover that, in fact, Kuwait has not only increased its domestic production, it's increased its domestic production on oil fields that it's not supposed to by treaty with Iraq. And they're actually pumping Iraq, at that point, they're stealing Iraqi oil, right? Because by pumping that out faster, it means they're getting oil that they're not supposed to be. So they're actually stealing Iraqi oil from the shared oil fields. And then using that to flood the markets to drive the prices down, which is wrecking the Iraqi recovery from the war. So it's like a double-edged act of war on Kuwait's part, which is a tiny little state. 1.5 million people, 500,000 who have citizenship, 1 million foreigners, and they're, you know, Iraq in 1990 was probably 24 million people. So there's this itty-bitty little state picking on this really big neighbor that has a land claim to it because Kuwait was carved out of the Basra province of the Ottoman Empire. Well, Basra ended up in Iraq. So this is a really strange thing to be doing. But the UN also found that the oil fields that were entirely in Iraq were also being drained by the Kuwaitis because the Kuwaitis were drilling down in spots that they had no proven oil and then slant drilling right into Iraqi fields and pumping the oil right out of Iraq. So it's not even questionable thievery, it's outright thievery. The Iraqis want a resolution passed in the UN. I forget exactly what happened in the UN at that point. I don't remember if they got the resolution or not, but the Iraqis then immediately start to issue condemnation statements and tell the Kuwaitis, please back off, and by the way, can you please also abide by the OPEC levels that you're supposed to be pumping oil at, you know, stop stealing our oil and stop flooding the markets. And of course, the Kuwaitis ignore it, and they ignore it, and they ignore it. By July of, somewhere around July 22nd or July 23rd, I'm not sure, I don't remember the exact date, but right around there, of 1990, Saddam Hussein brings April Glaspie, the US ambassador, into his office. And he starts off by saying, Iraq and the United States are great friends. I love my relationship with the United States. I want you to know that I respect whatever your position is on any issue, but I need you to know I'm having trouble with Kuwait. And her response is, I'm paraphrasing the hell out of this, obviously, but her response is something to the effect of, you know, we love our relationship with you. It's been a very profitable relationship for us. We want it to grow and do better in the future. And we sympathize with you on your position with Kuwait. They are clearly doing something wrong. At which point he says, we need to do something about it because they've been ignoring all our communication. They don't respond to us asking them to stop, and we've begun threatening them, and they're still not responding. So we may have to ramp this up. At which point, April Glaspie says, what happens between Arab states is of no concern to the United States of America. In other words, ding, green light, go. And he does. A week later, he invades Kuwait. It's a lightning-fast invasion. It takes 24 hours to secure Kuwait, mostly because the Kuwaiti military couldn't retreat fast enough. It probably would have gone down in 12 hours if the Kuwaitis had a better mobility. The Kuwaiti army spent the whole 24 hours running to Saudi Arabia as fast as it could, while the Iraqi army went in. The Iraqis went in with the Republican Guard, battle-hardened elite soldiers who had been fighting the Iranians for 8 years. They're extremely disciplined soldiers. Iraq, Saddam Hussein ordered the Republican Guard not to loot, not to rape, not to murder. They went in, they secured the state of Kuwait, and then immediately annexed it. And the reason you don't rape, murder, and pillage and plunder is because the way Iraq saw it was Kuwait was a breakaway part of Iraq, since it had been carved out of the Basra province. It would be probably roughly equivalent to if East Texas were carved off, and then at some point we went and invaded it and brought it back. That's the way the Iraqis looked at this. And they're fellow Arabs. They don't want to massacre them. They don't want to rape them. And because the Republican Guard are an elite force, they follow orders, right? If he had sent in regulars, they'd have kind of followed orders. But these are elites, so they totally follow orders. Reports start pouring in that Iraqis are not only raping, but they're going into hospitals and bayoneting babies, and it's a disaster. It turns out all those reports that the press was putting all over the news were coming from one person, a Kuwaiti member of the Kuwaiti royal family, who claimed that she had witnessed all of this. So this was based on one person's eyewitness account that they never vetted, right? Surprise, surprise, the press listening to somebody's testimony and not vetting them. That hasn't happened recently, Libya. Guy wasn't even there, right? And 60 Minutes is like, this guy saw it all happen. Oops. That's slightly embarrassing. But you don't remember, so it's okay. Because, right, you can whatever you can get away with, that's good. Whatever you don't get away with, that's bad. That's how that works, in politics anyway. So, George Bush Sr., I'll never forget it. He gets up in front of the world and he says, at this moment, I don't see anything wrong with the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, but we'll research it more. He then meets with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain in Aspen, Colorado, and they have 2 days where they just disappear from the news. They come out of the news, they come out of their 2 days in Aspen, and he holds a press conference, and he says, we have to do something to save the Middle East from that tyrant Saddam Hussein. He's a Hitler. He's a Hitler. 1,000 points of light, and all the other weird stuff he would say. He decides to create, or he announces that he's creating Desert Shield. So something happened in that 2 days that flipped him basically 180 degrees. He went from giving the green light for Iraq to invade Kuwait to even announcing that he thought it was an okay event to, oh my God, he's a Hitler, we need to stop him. He's actually a Hussein. It's not even spelled similar. I think pretty much everybody with last name Hitler got rid of it after World War II. I can't imagine there's somebody walking around. Although it turns out that Adolf's nephew got named Adolf. It's, Adolf whatever, Schmidt or Schultz or whatever. You gotta wonder about that. Like, really? You did the first name? We didn't want to let it go completely. We can sit here and speculate. I'm not really a big fan of speculating, but we kind of need to, so we'll do it. And so what happened? What was it that Margaret Thatcher said to him? Well, one thing for sure that happened, this is I guarantee you, is Great Britain loathed the loss of Kuwait. Kuwait was in their sphere of influence. Kuwait was, in a way, sort of a vestigial remnant of the British Empire. This was one of their achievements, was carving it out of the Ottoman Empire and attaching it to themselves. They really got it in 1913. They started it in 1899, and then 1901 they got it kind of ramped up. In 1913 they really got it. They formally had it. And they just couldn't stand the idea that they were completely losing this thing. So there's that. And then there's this. U.S.-Saudi relations kind of fell apart a little bit over the years. They got soured, and they got soured around Israel. And the Saudis would keep saying, why do you keep doing that? Palestinians are Arabs, we're Arabs, you're supporting the Israelis are murdering the Palestinians. We don't like that. And then they would say, yeah, well, we don't like that you're helping the Palestinians, and we would go back to sort of neutral. And over the years, the Saudis eventually kicked us out of Dhahran. They kicked us out of the air base there. They kept Aramco going, but then they insisted on renaming it eventually, right? And they named it Saudi Aramco, just so that everybody would know it belonged to the Saudi royal family. Saudi is not a name of a country, it's the name of a royal family. The country is Arabia. So saying Saudi Arabia would be like saying Obama America. It's just weird. Like, really, the family name got attached to the country? And that's exactly what the Saudis want, right? The Saudis, when I say the Saudis, I mean the royal family. I don't mean the people. The people are Arabs. They're actually really kind of, when you think about it, Arabians, because they're the original Arabs. Anyway, we keep going back and forth until 1973. So here's what happens in 1973. It's a really bizarre moment. So Israel is the aggressor state in the Middle East. In case you didn't know this, they're the sort of poke you in the eyes, punch you in the gut kind of guy. They're the bullies. And the way they were founded was they invaded a country that already existed and took it out, right? Palestine. And they did it in 1947, and then in 1948 they finished off Palestine. So their very birth is an aggressive, offensive event. Then, to make things more interesting, they participate in the Anglo-French War against Egypt as France and England's ally in 1956, so they attack again. But, strangely enough, Eisenhower humiliates Israel, France, and England and forces them out of Egypt, and it becomes a diplomatic Waterloo for the Europeans. And it ends up gaining the Israelis zero traction. So they didn't gain anything from 56. But then the Israelis attack again in 67, and then they gain. In 1967, Israel shames the Arab world in a way that's hard to imagine. Israel simultaneously attacks Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. Egypt is the largest Arab state, biggest military. Egypt had 222 airplanes in its air force in 1967. All 222 were destroyed on the ground. Not a single one managed to take off. The Israelis catch the Arabs so off guard, so by surprise, the war lasts 6 days before they've completely beaten the crap out of the Arabs. And just to bring it home, the Israelis actually bombed Cairo. They even bombed the pyramids. They just really wanted to make everybody understand what a shaming drubbing they had inflicted on the Egyptians and the Syrians and the Jordanians. And in the process, they grab the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. But the boundary between the Sinai and the rest of Egypt is the Suez Canal. Suez Canal is now a war zone. Suez Canal had shipping that would go from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean via the Red Sea. Egypt doesn't have the Suez Canal anymore, neither does Israel, because their armies are facing off against each other at the Suez Canal. And the Israelis sank a bunch of ships when they attacked Egypt into the Suez Canal, and nobody can go in and extract them because it's a war zone, and so the Suez Canal is shut down. International shipping from Europe to Asia is completely shut down unless you go all the way around Africa, which of course is a disaster if you're trying to cut shipping costs. Egypt got revenue for ships going through the Suez Canal, so this is also a disaster for Egypt. It's an economic disaster for Egypt, and it's a shaming event for Egypt. And guess what? Egypt had some oil, not much, some, all in the Sinai. So now Israel has all of Egypt's oil supply. So Egypt has to get the Sinai back for honor, for oil, and for the Suez Canal. And so they began planning immediately after 67 to get the Sinai back, and the way they do it is Egypt finally attacks. The first time the Arabs actually attack Israel, 1973. Egypt finally does it, and they beat the Israeli army to a pulp for 2 days. It's a complete, utter, humiliating rout for the Israelis. They're caught completely off guard, and their Sinai army disintegrates. You've never heard this narrative before, have you? Israel's invincible. It can't be harmed. It's perfect in every way. Well, not 1973. Henry Kissinger immediately calls up the Israelis, and he goes, hey, it's time to start talking about a peaceful solution to this, surrender. So let's start you guys talking. I'll be the intermediary with Egypt 2 days into this conflict. And the Israelis go, no, we will never negotiate from a position of weakness. So Henry Kissinger goes, what do you mean? You won't negotiate from weakness. You're getting your butts kicked. Hey, we won't do it. We'll fight to the end, but we'll never negotiate from a position of weakness. We'll use the nuke. We've got it. You know we do, because we stole the uranium from you, from Oak Ridge. They did. They actually broke into Oak Ridge and stole our uranium and made the nuke with the South Africans. They co-made a nuke. That's how the South Africans got the nuke. The Israeli scientists using stolen uranium, and then the South Africans provided them with more uranium, and then they split the nukes and they sent them. Because, right, birds of a feather flock together. Isn't that cool? Kind of help each other out. Oh, you stole this too? So did we. And then, of course, we're allies with both. Huh? Isn't that cool? Birds of a feather. that weird? It's like, oh yeah, we've even got segregation. And then the South Africans are like, cool, let's do that. We'll call it apartheid. We did it first, right? We're always like, oh my God, can you believe the South Africans in apartheid? Yeah, they were modeling us. We were the role model. Where do you think that came from? Apartheid is just Dutch for segregation. Apart, segregate, it's the same word. Never occurred to you? Like, what? Anyway, so Kissinger goes, well, we don't want this to turn into a nuclear war. We don't want you defeated. So what do we have to do to get you to negotiate? The Israelis go, we need a new army. Kissinger goes, what do you mean? We need a new tank army in the desert. In desert warfare, tanks are king. We need new tanks. The Egyptians obliterated our tanks. So we fly US tanks to Israel en masse, as many as we can. We give them a brand new army. Kissinger goes, all right, let's start negotiating now. Israelis go, no. Now we have to go beat Egypt. And they do. Isn't that cool? Sadat, the president of Egypt, gets up in front of the world and goes, we have proven in the 1973 war that we can defeat Israel. We did. And we lost to the United States. Nobody can defeat the United States. And they also at that moment said in everybody's mind, that there was no way to deal with Israel without also dealing with the United States, because Israel would cheat and get the United States to help it out. Also, Israel did bring us to the brink of World War III, by the way. The Israelis not only captured back to the Suez Canal, they crossed it and were marching in towards Cairo. Their goal was to capture Cairo and humiliate the Egyptians. And on their way, the Soviets called up the US, and the Soviets told us, look, if they get 100 kilometers into Egypt proper on the western side of the Suez Canal, if they get 100 kilometers, and they cross it, so they hit that 100.1 kilometer point, we're going to invade. We're going to invade Egypt and Syria, and we're going to fight the Israelis head on. Kissinger called up the Israelis and said, hey, we've got a problem. The Soviets are going to get involved. They're going to go full on if you cross that 100-kilometer mark. We just want you to know we're not going to intervene. We're not going to take any more of your crap. I'm sick of negotiating with you. You stop at 100 kilometers. And the Israelis did. They got to 100 kilometers, they stopped, and then they cut a section of Egyptian highway out and took it back to Israel as a souvenir. So, everybody is looking at this going, this Iraq invading Kuwait situation, looking and going, this is in a way that the Arabs can kind of put themselves together, because the whole reason the Israelis were doing these types of wars against Egypt, they were focusing on Egypt. They also attacked Jordan and Syria, but they're focusing on Egypt is because they feared that Egypt would at some point down the road get strong enough that it could unify the Arabs, and then the Israelis would have a real problem on their hands. The other thing that happened in 73 was that the Egyptians had gone to the Saudis and said, we need 1 month of oil revenues from you guys. Help us out. Give us 1 month of oil revenue. If you give us that 1 month, it'll allow us to buy all the equipment we need to defeat the Israelis. The Saudis said, never. We will never give you that money. And the reason is the Saudis assumed that the Egyptians would buy that equipment, beat Israel, and then turn around and beat them. And they actually weren't far from the mark. I met an Egyptian officer who said that the Egyptians in 73 came up with plans to invade Israel and Saudi Arabia. So they were probably right to be nervous about arming Egypt. Egypt beat Israel without that money. But the Saudis came up with a counteroffer. They said, you attack, we'll boycott US oil sales. And what that'll do is that'll cause an oil shock and drive the price of oil through the roof. And it'll wreck the US economy, and it'll hurt them. It'll teach them a lesson. Because this is where the US-Saudi relations had gotten to. They'd gotten bad. But by the way, it wasn't the Saudis' idea. You know whose idea it was? Exxon, Mobil, Chevron. Our oil companies went to the Saudis and went, don't you just wish you could boycott the US? And Saudis went, oh my God, that would drive the price of oil through the roof. And they go, it sure would. It sure would. And then, of course, then we get another oil shock in 70 and 79. One of the reasons why the United States wants to go into Iraq is the Saudis want the United States to go into Iraq. We make a deal with the Saudis. We get our air base in Tehran back. You guys let us go to war with Iraq, or we go to war with Iraq. We'll give you our air base back, or you'll give us our air base in Saudi Arabia back. So that's another reason. Another reason is Iraq had the third or second, actually, I can't remember, oil reserves on Earth, right? We didn't buy it. You're always like, we did this for oil. Kinda, in a weird way. 5% of all the oil the United States imported in 1990 came from Kuwait and Iraq combined. We got 95% of our oil from somewhere else. If we needed to, we could conceivably transfer oil sales to Venezuela or Mexico or Norway or Great Britain and cover that 5% relatively easy. It might have meant a slight increase in oil prices for us, but it wouldn't have been particularly catastrophic. That is, assuming that the Iraqis were going to cut off oil sales to us. They not only weren't going to cut off oil sales to us, they not only had no intention of cutting off oil sales to us, they left everything intact when they captured Kuwait so that there would be no disruption in the flow of oil. So there was no reason on earth for us to do this for our oil. How it got on their sand, we're still trying to figure it out. For our oil, there's no reason, but for everybody else's oil, there is. If we're sitting on top of Iraqi and Kuwaiti oil, and let's say the Chinese or the Europeans or the Indians get a little uppity, then we can cut off their oil. So that's another possible reason for us to go into a war with Iraq. Another possible reason is Israel. Israel kept talking about how Iraq had become a threat, and that's a possible reason. Another possible reason is we hadn't really been in a large conflict since Vietnam. And in fact, the Reagan administration had the stated purpose of getting us to overcome something that the Reagan administration called the Vietnam syndrome. So Vietnam War ends. How do Americans feel about war at the end of the Vietnam War? Really bad, because we just got our asses handed to us by an itty-bitty little country, right? We killed 3 million of them first, lost 58,000, and kept score on TV every evening, right? Running tallies of the death tolls from both sides, because it was a video game, I guess, before video games. We murder them, but they still win. They still prevail. We have no taste for war at the end of the Vietnam War. The Reagan administration actually set out to find wars we could get into so we could get back into the swimming pool, so to speak. You know, get your toe in, then the foot, then the ankle, knee, and the next thing you know, you're swimming around. And you know, because the Reagan administration assumed we couldn't just jump in. So what's their first target? Lebanon. 1982, Israel invades Lebanon. The reason that we go into Lebanon is because in 1958, we successfully invaded Lebanon. We sent in the Marine Corps, in fact. So we sent the Marine Corps back in 82 to help the Israelis. Now, what we're trying to do is two things. One, help the Israelis. Two, prevent them from going into Beirut, because we're worried about what will happen if Israel invades Beirut. We'll do it for them. So the French, the Italians, the United States, and the British go into Beirut, and we carve the city up, and while the Israelis beat the living crap out of Lebanon, a tiny country, it's much smaller than Israel. And then, of course, our Marines get blown to smithereens by a suicide bomber. So that didn't work, right? Because the whole reason for doing this is we get a win, it's an easy win, we walk away, the American public starts to go, oh, we can do war, it's okay. Next thing you know, Marine body parts everywhere, and the press is all over it, and we're like, oh. So Reagan recovers. How? Hannibal? Grenada. Grenada had like 13 East Germans and Cubans building a runway with bulldozers. And so we go, it's a communist invasion. And we invade and we put it down, and it's a joke. Grenada's a joke to begin with, but our military intervention is a joke. But we win, and we distract the public. We're like, oh, no, don't look at the body parts. Look over here, look at Grenada. Look, it's a Caribbean island with communists. Look at that. We put that down. And the reason that Grenada got the East Germans and Cubans to build the runway is they were the lowest bidder. It wasn't like they were going communist or anything. And then we'll do Panama under Bush. So it goes Lebanon, oops, then Grenada, yay, then Panama, yay. And now we can do Iraq. It'll be the last installment in curing us of Vietnam syndrome. And then we can test all our weapon systems out, like the Patriot missile, which, by the way, shot down 0 Scuds in the war against Iraq. It was completely unsuccessful. It did hit some, but then the Scud would break up and then hit multiple targets. So it was like it gave the Scud MIRV capacity, multiple re-entry vehicle, but it was like on accident. So not a good idea, probably. In the second war, we shot down a British helicopter, so the Patriot missile is a very good system for not actually helping us win wars. We love it. That's why we do the commercials with it. Dude, I did way too much background. So there's lots of reasons to do this. That first war ends. It's a turkey shoot. The Iraqis, after a month of being bombed into the Stone Ages, we bomb everything. We bomb their bridges, we bomb their baby formula factories, we bomb their drug factories, we bomb their schools, we bomb everything. We smash Iraq to pieces. We dropped more tonnage in that month on Iraq than every explosive that went off in World War II for the entire 8 years, including the 2 nuclear bombs. We try to erase Iraq from the world. We probably killed around 185,000 Iraqis, somewhere in that range, in basically a month and 5 days. The day that we start the ground war, Iraq surrendered 3 or 4 times. We never accepted the surrender. At one point, Saddam Hussein was calling up Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union and saying, please surrender on our behalf. They've ignored all our previous surrender attempts. And so Mikhail Gorbachev calls up George Bush Sr. and says, the Iraqis have surrendered. And he goes, I don't care, we're fighting this. And we do. And it's an easy win. And then George Bush Sr. gives Iraq a way out. And the way out, it's really strange. The way out is get rid of your weapons of mass destruction. It's really strange because, I hate to tell this to you, but chemical weapons are not weapons of mass destruction. Biological weapons are weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. And by the way, conventional weapons, when concentrated, are weapons of mass destruction. Chemical weapons are weapons of terror. They're not very effective. I mean, they can do damage, especially if the other side doesn't have gas equipment, but they're just not good. And one of the reasons is they can get blown away in the wind. They're just not effective weapons. In World War I, where 13 million people died, 85,000 died of chemical weapons. Who cares at that point, right? 13 million, 85,000, the chemical weapons were a scratch. The reality is that we turned the dialogue around and made it look like Iraq was much more menacing than it was. But the Iraqis responded. Saddam Hussein ordered the destruction of all his chemical weapons. They took the chemical weapons stockpiles into the desert in August of 1991 and blew them all up. The UN weapons inspection regime starts shortly afterwards. Eventually, Scott Ritter, a US Marine, self-proclaimed conservative, becomes the head of the UN weapons inspection regime. And for about 6 years, he will go in Iraq and look for all the weapons that weren't weapons of mass destruction, all the chemical weapons, the VX gas, the sarin gas, the mustard gas, that we've provided to them. So he'd walk up to the Iraqis and he would go, hey, by the way, how do I know this? Because he's said this a lot. He's written books and he's also done lots of speeches. So I'm totally just going, this story here is based on Scott Ritter's accounts. He would go to the Iraqis and he would go, you have this many VX gas rockets, where are they? And the Iraqis would go, we don't have them. And he would go, yes you do. And they would go, no we don't. And he would pull out the receipts with all the serial numbers on them. How do we have the serial numbers? We're the ones who provided them with the rockets. And you go, see? And the Iraqis would go, yes, we had them, but when George Bush Sr. said we had to get rid of them, we did, and we blew them all up. Scott Ritter goes, what the hell did you do that for? We need to account for them. And they go, because we didn't think you'd want the world to know that you provided us with those things. We thought it was all shh. We thought we were doing you a favor by getting rid of them. So Scott Ritter would be like, all right, where'd you blow these up? And they would drive out into the desert. They of course have hazmat suits on. And they would go through the desert. They would see a blast area. So yep, something blew up there. And then bits of metal everywhere. And they would sift the sand looking for the serial numbers. And they did this for 6 years. And they found 98% of those serial numbers. Scott Ritter was about to give, in 1998, the free and clear for Iraq on chemical weapons, because 98%, that leaves 2%. You go, isn't that dangerous? It's not. All of those weapons had a 7-year shelf life. The last delivery was 1988. 1988 plus 7 is 1995. It's 1998. It's 3 years past the shelf life. Now, it's true they could still be a little bit dangerous, but it's just 2%. 2%, 3 years past the shelf life. He's ready to just write off the remaining 2% as the serial numbers were unrecoverable. They probably blew everything up. He had gone to every spot he wanted to that the Iraqis had that he thought they could be hiding something, and he didn't find anything but blown up serial numbers. He's about to give Iraq the free and clear, and Bill Clinton orders him out of the country and bombs Iraq. And of course, the reason was Bill Clinton had turned Iraq into, I need to distract the American public. Something's going on in my administration, bomb, 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 bomb. And in fact, Bill Clinton imposed on Iraq the most brutal sanctions in the history of mankind. We cut off their food and we cut off their medicine. We eventually will do the Food for Aid program, but it was an incredibly inefficient, corrupt program, and it doesn't actually restore the level of food necessary. In the Clinton administration, 100,000 Iraqis died a year from starvation and lack of medical treatment. Of those 800,000, because he was president 8 years, 100,000 a year, of the 800,000, the UN estimates that 500,000 were age 5 and below. In other words, we murdered 500,000 babies in the 8 years of the Clinton administration. And then, by the way, those sanctions will go another 4 years into the Bush Jr. administration, so we probably killed somewhere around 1 million to 1.2 million Iraqis through these sanctions. The sanctions crippled Iraq. It brought it to its knees. It wrecked the health of the Iraqis. They were dealing with all sorts of problems. They had depleted uranium shells exploded all over the country, especially in the south, but all over. And depleted uranium is totally radioactive. And they had, 8-year-old girls running around with breast cancer, and they're having to do radical mastectomies on 8-year-old girls. And they're trying to deal with this. They have no chemo. They have no radiation treatment. They don't even have proper X-ray equipment because it's all radioactive material, and that's excluded by the sanctions. Pretty much the only thing we're letting into the country is acetaminophen. It's a disaster, those 12 years. When George Bush Jr. finally decides to attack in 2003, of course, the claim is that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction and they're trying to work on the nuke. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction because we knew this in 1998. 5 years we've known this because Scott Ritter almost gave them the Bill of Health and said that this thing is clean. But we go in anyway. We go in against a country that never attacked us, never threatened to attack us, never had the means to attack us, and was, by their own admission, an ally of us. We actually attacked a country that, for all intents and purposes, was actually conducting our own foreign policy, including being our proxy in the Iran-Iraq war, including getting permission from us first before invading Kuwait. They were actually a really well-behaved tyranny. Now you say, wow, but we were getting rid of a tyrant. That may very well be. And Saddam Hussein was not a nice person. He was a pretty brutal bastard. He didn't discriminate against you on your ethnicity, necessarily. He did when you rose up against him. In the aftermath of the first war, he slaughters the Shia and the Kurds because we tell them rise up, they rise up, and then we withdraw. And Saddam Hussein has no choice but to put them down to keep the state intact. So his goals were his own personal power. There are plenty of rulers on earth who have that kind of goal. If you're mad, like why didn't we intervene against the Burmese military junta, right? There are plenty of places, why aren't we doing something in North Korea? There are plenty of places on earth. Why don't we do something about Museveni in Uganda? He's not exactly the nicest person the world has ever seen. Or Mobutu Sese Seko in what used to be the Zaire, right? He's no longer in power because there was Laurent Kabila who put him down. But why that one particular guy? What was it about him that made it so that we had to go after them? Let me give you one last stat, and I want to give you some time to ask questions, even though I'm almost over. But I just think it's kind of worthwhile doing. The Iraq War since 2003, I can't tell you the casualty rate. I can't tell you a casualty number because I've not seen Johns Hopkins has made a couple of attempts at pinning that number down. The last time I looked at it was probably about 5 years ago. I think they had the number at 2 million. But I don't know that anybody has a really good number. And they did it by a statistical sampling. Here's a number that I found useful. The number of orphans in Iraq. The number of orphans in Iraq are 5 million out of a population of, today Iraq probably has about 34, I think, 33 or 34 million people. One out of 7 people in Iraq is an orphan. The fertility rate in Iraq happens to be 5. 5 million means 1 million dead moms and then another million dead dads. Because an orphan, right, you don't have either parent. So that's 2 million right there. Another stat that's worth looking at is the number of widows. There's 1.5 million widows in Iraq. Now, it is true that in the general human population, women outlive men. It is not true in Iraq. Men and women have roughly the same mortality rate. So in other words, it's not because women are outliving men in Iraq that there's 1.5 million widows. It means that the majority of that is because the men are dead, and the majority of that is going to be through warfare. Even if you're conservative, that number might be as high as another 1 million. So and that doesn't include all the children who were killed. Right? So the number since 2003, really since 1991, is probably somewhere around 3 million. And I don't know a way to pin that number down. And of course, we don't want to talk about this. We then lose 5,000 or so of our own people, and the war ended up costing about $1 trillion. We stole probably somewhere around $200 billion worth of oil. Now you say, well, this is what you get for electing a president who failed 2 companies and nearly failed a baseball team. I don't know how you fail a baseball team. You have to be a business moron. But anyway, that's who you elected and then re-elected. Or at least you elected him once, maybe twice. It's difficult to pin down that one too. You may not have elected him at all. It turns out in 2004 there's some iffy stuff happening with the election. But you go, stole 200 billion, lost 3 trillion, that's not good math. Where did that, why would you do that? What would possibly be your incentive? Well, I think the question you need to ask yourself is, who got the $3 trillion? And who got the $3 trillion are Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Kellogg Brown and Root, Halliburton, right? In other words, at some level, the Iraq War was probably just a massive money transfer scheme to get you to end up absorbing a massive debt while these guys end up with this really huge profit that they walk away. The 3 trillion isn't exactly right. It's probably closer to 2 trillion in outright costs. The 1 trillion is because we'll have lingering costs. For example, the VA costs, the cost to the economy, the sort of the ripple effect that take place. And then of course, everybody's like, well, we did it for oil. I don't know if you've noticed this, but oil prices tripled since we did this. So if we did, again, fail, unless the goal was to drive the price of oil up, well, that hasn't happened before. And so that was sarcasm. And of course, because there was 73, I just showed you where we actually intentionally tried to drive the price of oil up. The question is what was the relationship between the Saudi royal family and the Bush family? Not only was the Saudi royal family on good terms, but Saddam Hussein's, Osama bin Laden's dad, his construction company in Saudi Arabia was on good terms with the Bushes. If I remember correctly, it was Osama bin Laden's dad who bailed out George Bush when George Bush's company, Arbusto, went bankrupt. So that relationship was really, really good. Bandar Bush, as the Saudi Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia, who got called Bandar Bush because he spent so much time at the Bush household and had dinner all the time with Barbara Bush. Just because, so this is one of the things I think people miss about elites. Elites don't actually have loyalty to states. This is something you just need to figure out really fast. Elites only care about themselves and their own families and their own power base. And so you could have enemy states where elites hang out together. Just sort of give you awkward moments here. Bashar al-Assad, the tyrant of Syria, who's in trouble because of the civil war, and now I can't think of his name, the president of of Turkey, he actually used to go on cruises with Bashar al-Assad. They used to go on Mediterranean cruises together. But now he's on the other side. He's with the rebels, and so the relationship is over. But honestly, they probably still go on cruises secretly. Nobody cares. They don't care. The elites don't care about the public. The Saudis would get mad at us for support of Israel. We get mad at them for supporting people we didn't like, and then we'd go back to being good friends again. It's just a little tiff, and then we go back. We had moments where they soured, like when they threw us out of our air base in Zahran, but then we got it back when we attacked Iraq and drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait. By the way, we bombed the hell out of Kuwait when we drove the Iraqis out. That can't be because we wanted to have our contractors have a bunch of contracts. I'm sure that's not why we did it. Well, you mentioned national security, and I think one of the tragedies of all of this is we've done everything to harm national security. By turning Iraq into this unstable disaster area, effectively, we've created a breeding ground, a recruiting ground for the very guys that we say we're there to fight. And so that we should expect, as the kids who grow up with no parents, who have no prospects because their country was smashed into the Stone Ages, when those kids grow up, they'll probably be the very kids, the very types of people that organizations like Al-Qaeda can recruit from. So I would actually expect terrorism to increase. Again, the thing about Iraq, both times, 91 and 2003, is it's kind of a mystery. Why are we doing this? What is it about this that's in our self-interest? It's not really the oil. It is, but not really. It's not really because Saddam Hussein's a dictator. He is, but who cares? There are so many of them. Pick one. Like you just take the globe and spin it, and let's go after that guy. I think the world did also learn the lesson that if you have the nuke, the US will leave you alone, right? Because we left North Korea alone, but we went after Iraq. And the reason I think the world learned that lesson is, as of 2003, probably 24 states have actually started working on the nuke, including Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Egypt. Japan was, before the Fukushima disaster, working on the nuke. You want me to say that again? Japan actually decided to start working on the nuke. The US attack against Iraq so destabilized the world system that the country that got nuked actually decided, man, we need to start working on this thing. I suspect they've abandoned it since Fukushima, but I'm not sure, just because people overreacted to Fukushima. Yeah, it might be in our self-interest on the surface, but in reality, I suspect it's just in the self-interest of Halliburton and Kellogg Brown and Root and the Bush family and the Saudi family. 1 year after we liberated Kuwait and restored it back to its way of life, which was a monarchy with absolute power, there was no parliament because the ruler of Kuwait had actually dissolved the Kuwaiti parliament. Women were obviously second-class citizens. The million people, foreigners, that were 2/3 of the population were fourth-class citizens. That when we restored Kuwait to that status, because when the Iraqis invaded, they actually gave women equal rights, and they actually gave rights to the foreigner population in Kuwait. There was actually an upgrade in terms of human rights. You know you're in trouble when Saddam Hussein means an upgrade in terms of human rights. This is bad. When we restore them back to the old way, we noticed that the Emir of Kuwait hadn't returned back to Kuwait a year later, and we called him up. Hey, what's going on? We see you're still in Saudi Arabia. Well, why aren't you going back? And he said, well, when you bombed Kuwait, you blew up my palace, and you were fighting for my way of life, and my way of life is living in a palace, and I can live in one in Saudi Arabia, but I can't in Kuwait. So I'm just waiting for my palace to be rebuilt by Kellogg Brown and Root. So the question is, why aren't we learning? And I wish I knew this answer, because if I did, I would then write an amazing book about why we're not learning and solve the problem. It turns out that as a political scientists have done these studies, and one of the things we've discovered is Americans have a 2-year memory for politics. So what politicians do is they plan things out with 2-year increments, because that 2-year memory is really convenient. The classic example of this is in 1973, we went to the North Vietnamese and we said, we want this war to end. And they said, okay, so you're surrendering? And Kissinger was like, no, no, we just want the war to end. And the North Vietnamese are like, so you're surrendering? Because we'll never surrender, we'll fight to the death. So you're surrendering. He goes, no, you don't understand. We're the United States of America. We've never lost a war. We never will. Even when we lose them, we won't. So we need you to know that you have to give us a way out. And so the North Vietnamese, in frustration, go, okay, what do you have in mind? And he told them, this 2-year memory. All we got to do is use this to our advantage. We're going to declare we won. You wait 2 years, no violence, everything calm and peaceful. And then in 2 years, you take out South Vietnam. The American public won't remember because it'll be 2 years from now. So all we're asking from you is to do basically a 2-year ceasefire with South Vietnam, stop all the violence. We'll declare we won, we'll do victory parades, we'll bring our troops home, most of them anyway. And then in 2 years, you just go punk South Vietnam and it'll be over. And the North Vietnamese are, okay, whatever it takes for you to end this stupid war. And that's exactly how we make peace with them. So the answer from the top is they use this to manipulate you. They realized, like in 2003, 2001, everybody should have known that Afghanistan was going to be a disaster. 2003, everybody should have known Iraq was going to be a disaster. This should not have been I didn't see it coming. You know, like when we deregulated the economy in the 80s and 90s, we should have seen the economic downturn in 2008 coming. This shouldn't have been a surprise because the reason we regulated the economy was to prevent events like 2008 from happening to begin with. So when we deregulated it, we should have known, okay, we're going to have this happen again. Like we're always surprised when we do the same thing over and over again and we get in the same result. And I don't know, other than that the public generally just doesn't pay attention. But so do academicians. I mean, there are plenty of colleagues who probably hate what I just did because they're going to say, no, that's not right. Those aren't the lessons you should take away from Iraq. The lessons are, how do you fight urban guerrilla warfare? Right? And I should have concentrated on that. By the way, don't use tanks in urban guerrilla warfare. And that's a lesson we learned in World War II in Stalingrad. The Germans went in with tanks, and the Russians showed the world how you can blow up tanks with grenade bundles in city fighting. You know, then we're surprised when we go into Iraq with tanks and we're fighting urban battles, and we're like, wow, this isn't working. Why? I don't know. I just don't understand why we get surprised. And you're right, way before internet, we should have known all this. After the internet, there's zero excuse, right? Because it's a search away. What are the chances of winning, I guess, would be your search if we attack this country. I think the next war we do, we should be against Germany and Japan, because World War II is cool. That was epic. So that's my vote, especially because they're good. You know what I mean? Like. And then when we get defeated by them, it won't be as humiliating. Because we've been defeated now by Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. You know, that's kind of, that's hard to bear.